What if one of the darkest moments in U.S. immigration history began with a single memo? Imagine a policy that tore children from their parents' arms in the name of deterrence. A policy so cruel that it violated international human rights agreements, yet was pushed forward by high-ranking officials, despite the moral outrage it sparked. That's exactly what happened with family separation, a policy that became one of the most controversial decisions in recent U.S. politics. Today we're going to break down how this policy started, who's responsible, and why it remains a stain on America's conscience. Trust me.
I believe that everyone is operating in good faith, and I just want us to be very careful with that. With that, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Earlier, my colleague from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, asked the panel how many people here believe that child separation is an effective policy in deterrence. And no one on the panel raised their hand. I just wanted to note that for the record, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask a question from Professor Mukherjee. Is the United States violating or violated human rights agreements set by the United Nations in a family separation policy?
Yes. International law is clear that family unity should be prioritized.
So we, as members of the United Nations, signed on into an international human rights agreement saying very clearly that family separation is a violation of international human rights, and then we pursued a policy that violates human rights. Mr. Chair, I was looking, how did we get to this point? How did we get to this point where we take children out of mothers' and fathers' arms? And, it dated back, family separation in the way that we have seen it, where we take children away from their parents without due process, began last year under Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, but I had to dig further. And our staff dug further. But where did this start within the administration? She implemented it. And we found a memo. It dates back to April 23rd of 2018, where there was an official recommendation to, quote, pursue prosecution of all amenable adults who cross our border, quote, illegally, even though this applied to legal asylum seekers in practice, including those presenting with a family unit between ports of entry in coordination with DOJ. Here is the memo that I would like to submit to the congressional record.
What is the date of that?
It is the memorandum for the Secretary from Homeland Security.
Date.
April 23rd, 2018, subject increasing prosecutions of immigration violations.
Without objection.
And so I looked at this memo, and it seems like this is the source of it. And it seems as though, Mr. Homan, that you are the author. It says here from yourself, Kevin Michalinen, and Francis Cisna. Is this correct? Did you sign the memo?
I'd have to see what you...
I'd be happy to provide it. And we'll provide it over, but I would like to note that here it says the official recommendation. There were 3 different options presented. The third included the option for family separation. This initiative would pursue prosecution of all amenable adults, including those presenting with a family unit. Mr. Homan, your name is on this. Is this correct?
Yes, I signed that memo.
So you are the author of the family separation policy.
I am not the author of this memo.
You're not the author, but you signed the memo.
Yes, a zero tolerance memo.
So you provided the official recommendation to Secretary Nielsen on for the United States to pursue family separation.
I gave Secretary Nielsen numerous recommendations on how to secure the border and save lives.
But it says here that you gave her numerous options, but the recommendation was option 3, family separation.
What I'm saying, this is not the only paper where we've given the Secretary numerous options to secure the border and save lives.
And so the recommendation, of the many that you recommended family separation.
I recommended zero tolerance.
Which includes family separation.
The same as is with every U.S. citizen parent gets arrested when they're with a child.
Zero tolerance was interpreted as the policy that separated children from their
If I get arrested for DUI and I have a young child in the car, I'm going to be separated. When I was a police officer in New York and I arrested a father for domestic violence, I separated that father
Mr.
from his
Homan, with all
family.
due respect, legal asylees are not charged with any crime.
When you're into the country illegally, it's violation 8 United States Code 1325.
Seeking asylum is legal.
If you want to seek asylum and go through the port of entry, do it the legal way. The Attorney General of the United States has made that clear.
Okay. Mr. Chair, the memo is submitted to the record for review. Inspector General Costello, one last thing. Is there a record, based on reports throughout the year, and in our hearing earlier this year, we spoke with Ms. Juarez, a mother who lost her child due to inhumane conditions in the facilities. We learned that there is no accurate record and no policy being held of people who are pregnant and people who endure miscarriages. Is there a record of who enters and leaves these facilities?
I'm not familiar with the instance you're talking about, but I do believe the facilities keep custody logs and logs, but I'm not familiar with the incident you're talking about.
And where would we find those records?
I believe all the facilities keep them on site, CBP and ICE facilities.
And if you believe that the records are not accessible, or if we find that the records are not accessible, do you believe the committee should seek to request records from DHS on the location of children and those that are detained?
Well, we would never opine about what the committee would request and not request, so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ms. Presley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very proud to represent and to call the Massachusetts.
You don't want to miss this. AOC, or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, isn't afraid to speak out, especially when it comes to issues of human rights. In a tense moment during a congressional hearing, she confronted Tom H. Mann, the face of U.S. immigration enforcement, and asked a direct question. She wanted to know, how many people here believe that child separation is an effective policy in deterrence? The room fell silent, with no one on the panel raising their hand. This wasn't just a question about policy, it was a moral challenge, a stark reminder that what was happening on America's southern border wasn't just about law enforcement, it was a violation of basic human rights. By asking that question, AOC exposed the cruelty of the policy. This wasn't just about bureaucratic mistakes or ineffective laws. It was a direct assault on families, tearing children away from their parents. When no one could defend the policy as effective, it revealed the truth. Family separation wasn't about deterrence, it was about cruelty, and AOC was determined to make sure that the American public saw it for what it was. AOC didn't stop there. She pushed harder, calling out the U.S. for violating international human rights agreements, specifically the ones signed by the United Nations. These agreements are clear: family unity should be prioritized, yet the U.S. was pursuing a policy that went against these very agreements, violating human rights on an international stage. AOC didn't just challenge a policy, she challenged the U.S. government's moral authority to claim leadership on human rights worldwide. But this wasn't just about pointing fingers, it was about understanding how this policy came to be, and who was responsible. AOC dug deeper, exposing a memo from April 23, 2018, a memo that officially recommended the prosecution of all adults crossing the U.S. border illegally, including those with children. Even though the policy applied to legal asylum seekers, the memo clearly outlined how family units would be separated as part of the enforcement strategy. The cruel irony: these families were fleeing violence, seeking safety in the U.S., only to have their children torn away from them as a form of political leverage. This is where the policy started. A single memo, written under the direction of Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, set in motion the tragic separation of families at the border. And it wasn't just a miscommunication or misunderstanding, it was a calculated decision to use trauma as a tool for deterrence. When AOC revealed this memo, it was like pulling back the curtain on a carefully crafted strategy of cruelty, all under the guise of border security. The memo wasn't just a set of recommendations, it was a blueprint for the family separation policy, detailing how the government could enforce a zero-tolerance policy that involved separating families. AOC pushed Tom Homan on his role in this, directly questioning whether he was responsible for the memo. Homan tried to downplay his involvement, claiming he wasn't the author, but that he had merely signed the memo, but that didn't absolve him of responsibility. AOC wasn't letting him off the hook. She forced him to admit that he had signed the memo, which included the option of family separation. Homan's defense that he was just offering recommendations, and that the memo was just one of many options fell flat. AOC's line of questioning made it clear, this wasn't a policy pushed by accident. It was a choice, a deliberate decision to separate families, even though there were alternatives on the table, and that choice came with real devastating consequences for the children and parents who were affected. At this point, AOC wasn't just questioning policy, she was exposing the human cost of that policy. This wasn't about legal jargon or border security procedures. It was about children being pulled from their parents' arms, and the lasting emotional and psychological damage it caused. AOC's line of questioning challenged the narrative that family separation was justified, or even reasonable. She highlighted that asylum seekers are not criminals, and the U.S. law protects their right to seek refuge. As AOC pressed Homan further, he tried to compare family separation to routine arrests in the U.S. He mentioned that if a U.S. citizen were arrested while traveling with their child, they would also be separated. He even drew parallels to his experience as a police officer in New York, arresting parents for domestic violence. But AOC shot down this comparison quickly. Asylum seekers weren't committing crimes, they were fleeing violence and persecution, and under U.S. law, they had every right to seek asylum, without having their children torn from them. But that wasn't the only moral failure on display. Another shocking moment came when AOC turned the conversation to the lack of accurate records in immigration detention centers, specifically regarding pregnant women and those who suffered miscarriages. She pressed for answers, questioning whether the facilities were keeping proper logs of detainees. Homan's response was telling. He wasn't familiar with the incident she was referring to, and he didn't seem to have much knowledge of how detainees were being tracked. This wasn't just an issue of paperwork, it was a matter of accountability. When the U.S. government fails to keep accurate records of who is being detained, it makes it impossible to hold anyone accountable for abuse. And when there's no accountability, the system can continue to operate unchecked, leaving vulnerable individuals at risk. AOC's confrontation exposed just how deeply flawed and inhumane the system was, turning a discussion about bureaucracy into a direct condemnation of a government that had failed to protect its most vulnerable. This wasn't just about one policy or one moment. It was about the systemic cruelty that was allowed to continue unchecked. AOC's challenge to Tom Homan and her efforts to uncover the truth behind family separation became a pivotal moment in the fight for immigrant rights. It wasn't just about holding one person accountable. It was about demanding justice for those whose lives were torn apart by an administration that prioritized politics over people. So what do you think? Is this the kind of America we want to be? A country that violates its own human rights agreements, separates families, and treats asylum seekers as criminals? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more thought-provoking content like this. We'll keep you informed, and we'll keep pushing for the truth.